At my uncle's retirement celebration, my cousin looked me over and snorted, still sporting those bargain suits, huh? Just don't steal anything, we know times are tough. Everyone burst out laughing. I only smiled and kept quiet. An hour later, the caterer took me aside and asked, "Where should we send the final payment?" I pointed at my cousin and said, "He's covering it, this was his idea, right?" His face strained as the $7,200 bill slid onto the table in front of him. What if the people you're supposed to trust the most are the very ones trying to bury you alive? What if the only way to truly survive wasn't just to turn the other cheek, but to do so with a patient, chilling strategy brewing just beneath the surface? You ever walk into a room and immediately regret not wearing armor? Not actual armor, of course, but the kind that lets words just bounce off, the kind that protects your pride when your own family treats you like you just wandered in from the wrong side of the tracks. For years, that's how it felt walking into any Miller family gathering. The air always thick with unspoken judgments, a palpable sense of superiority hanging over everything like an expensive, suffocating perfume. My name is Ethan. I'm 34, I work in commercial real estate, and according to my cousin Mason, I'm the designated embarrassment of the family. Not because I've done anything wrong, not because I'm some tragic case, but simply because I don't play their game. And in a family like mine, that's reason enough to be looked down upon. See, being born into generational wealth, I'm talking gated driveways, vacation homes in 3 time zones, means there are unspoken but strictly enforced rules. You show up clean-shaven, in tailored suits. You drive something European. And for God's sake, you never mention work unless it's about how utterly exhausted your assistant is. I wasn't raised poor, but when my dad died when I was 15, everything shifted. My mom, who was never truly part of the inner circle, moved us out of the family compound and into a modest townhouse across town. No more trust fund deposits, no more catered dinners. It felt like being cut off from a life that was never really ours to begin with. And honestly, I didn't miss it. I learned to work. I built myself back up. But in my family's eyes, once you fall, you're never, ever allowed to forget it. So, when I showed up at my Uncle Arthur's retirement party, held at a vineyard the Miller family basically considered their backyard, I already knew the vibe. I'd gotten the formal invite 2 weeks prior, but I hadn't planned on going. It was my mom who gently nudged me into it. "It might be nice to see everyone again," she said, her voice careful, like she was trying to pretend this was normal. I could see it in her eyes, that soft hope that maybe this time they'd treat me like I belonged. I didn't want to disappoint her, so I put on my best charcoal gray suit, shined my shoes, and told myself I could survive a few hours of polite nods and empty compliments. The moment I arrived, my gut twisted. Nothing had changed. It was all champagne smiles and handshake politics. My cousin Mason was the first to spot me. He stood near the terrace with a glass of something expensive, flanked by 2 other cousins who'd long since become carbon copies of him. Mason's the kind of guy who always looks like he's stepped straight out of a yacht catalog, slicked back hair, blindingly white teeth, a tailored linen suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months' rent combined. He turned his head, gave me one of those slow, derisive up-and-down looks, and let out a short, contemptuous snort. "Still wearing those cheap suits, huh?" he said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. His voice carried that airy condescension I remembered from when we were kids. "Just don't steal anything. We know times are tough." I froze. For a split second, I wondered if I'd heard him right. Then, like a pack of obedient hyenas, the group around him chuckled. Some more awkwardly than others, but not a single one said a word in my defense. I smiled. Not because I found it funny, but because that's what you do when you've already made peace with the fact that they'll never see you as more than a cautionary tale. "Good to see you too, Mason," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He smirked and raised his glass in a mock salute. The rest of the evening blurred into a parade of forced pleasantries and passive-aggressive small talk. Aunt Brenda asked if I was still doing that thing with buildings, as if commercial real estate was some phase I'd eventually grow out of. Another cousin, I forget which, they all blend together, asked if I was dating anyone with money this time. It was like being pecked to death by pigeons and pearls. I found myself gravitating towards the edges of the event, sipping water while everyone else made a game out of showcasing their perceived impressive lives. But then, something truly odd happened. Something that didn't quite fit the usual script. About an hour into the party, one of the caterers, a guy maybe in his late 20s in a black shirt and apron, made his way over to me. He looked a little hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he had the right person. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice, "sorry to bother you, but we're ready to process the final payment. Do you want it all on one card, or?" I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He scratched his head. "You're Mr. Miller, right? Ethan Miller? The contract said you were the point of contact for this event." My eyebrows lifted, and then it clicked. The booking name. The contract. I turned my head slowly towards the party, specifically toward Mason, who at that moment was laughing at something and pouring himself another glass of red. Something inside me shifted. A quiet, cold rage simmered. I glanced back at the caterer. "Oh," I said, casually, almost dismissively. "You know what? You should probably check with him." I nodded toward Mason. "He's got it. This was his idea, right?" The caterer looked confused but nodded and wandered off toward the terrace. I stayed exactly where I was, watching from a distance as the scene unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Mason looked puzzled at first. Then the caterer handed him something, probably the final invoice, and I saw his expression change. His mouth tightened into a thin line, then opened slightly, like he was trying to form an objection. But the caterer just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. My smile deepened, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. The wheels were already turning, and all I had to do now was let them. But to understand why this moment mattered, why it cut so deep, and why Mason deserved every second of it, you need to know a little more about what happened in the months leading up to this party. Because this wasn't just about a jab at my suit or a stupid insult in front of a crowd. This was the boiling point of years of quiet jabs, broken promises, and one particular family betrayal that I hadn't spoken about since it happened. If you're still with me, buckle up, because things were about to get a whole lot uglier. Growing up, Mason and I were always side by side. Not because we were close, but because our moms insisted on it. Our birthdays were just 2 months apart. We went to the same private schools, and we were always paired off in family photos like some forced symmetry. But even as kids, the lines were drawn early. Mason was the heir apparent, the golden boy. Tall, athletic, naturally charming in that rehearsed pageant kid sort of way. I was quieter, smaller, and according to Aunt Brenda, too sensitive for my own good. She'd say it with this tight-lipped smile, like she was diagnosing a flaw she'd be forced to tolerate. Every family dinner, every holiday, every godforsaken gala was just another chance for them to remind me I wasn't cut from the same cloth. But I took it. I swallowed it. Not because I believed them, I didn't, but because my mom deserved peace. After my dad passed, she never remarried. She worked 2 jobs just to keep us in the school district, pretending like we weren't barely holding on while the rest of the family floated on generational wealth. And yet, she never let me speak badly about them. "They're still family," she'd say gently, her eyes tired. "Don't stoop to their level." So I didn't. I kept my head down, studied hard, worked internships through college, and climbed my way into real estate, one cold call at a time. I wasn't flashy, and I wasn't loud, but I built something real. By 31, I had 3 apartment complexes under my belt and a business model that was finally turning serious profit. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had my own. But the thing about Mason is, he always needed an audience. At 28, he blew through his first trust fund, launching a fashion startup that folded in under a year. At 30, he was pushing crypto schemes. By 32, he was dabbling in luxury event planning, something about creating curated experiences for legacy families, whatever that meant. He always knew how to pitch himself. And he always knew how to spin failure into a pivot. But under the surface, Mason was sinking. And none of them, not Uncle Arthur, not Aunt Brenda, not even my grandmother, seemed to notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. As long as he looked successful, that was enough. About 6 months before the retirement party, I got a call from him out of the blue. "Ethan, cousin, my man, you busy?" I remember checking the screen twice to make sure it was really him. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, not since the last family get-together where he joked about me flipping abandoned laundromats for rent money. "Hey, Mason," I said cautiously. "What's up?" He dove right in. "So, I've got this client, big name. Can't tell you who, NDA and all that, but they're looking to do a private party, super hush-hush, vineyard setting, think candlelight under the stars, string quartet type thing." He paused for dramatic effect. "Anyway, I remembered you've got connections in commercial spaces and rentals. Any chance you know a vineyard owner who might let me book discreetly?" I paused. "I know someone who owns one. Why not go through the usual channels?" He laughed. That practiced, performative chuckle that always rubbed me the wrong way. "Oh, come on, you know how it is. You try to book through the front desk and suddenly it's corporate rates and 10 forms. You've got that pull, man. You're legit. I just need a little help on the booking end. I'll handle everything else." I should have said no. Every part of me knew better. But a small part of me, maybe the one that still believed in some version of family loyalty, agreed. I called an old client who owned a vineyard about 40 minutes out of town. Quiet, beautiful place. I vouched for Mason, got him a discounted rate, and even looped in the catering company I'd worked with during a previous project. They trusted me. I lent him that trust freely. 3 weeks later, I saw a post on Instagram. "Honoring a legacy, a night for Arthur Miller." And there was Mason, front and center, arms around Uncle Arthur and Aunt Brenda, playing host in front of the exact venue I'd booked. There was no client. The private party was the retirement event all along, and I hadn't just helped him plan it. I'd handed it to him. My chest tightened. I scrolled through the pictures, elegant lanterns, custom table settings, string lights laced through the trees. It looked perfect. And Mason took credit for all of it. He never even invited me. I didn't say anything. Not to him, not to my mom. Not even when my aunt posted some passive-aggressive comment about how family always comes through for each other, especially the ones who know how to throw a real party. I stayed quiet again, like I always had. But then came the text. "Hey, Ethan. Quick thing. I told the vineyard and caterers you'd finalize the payment. They said it could be done on site, just easier since it was all in your name anyway. You're the best, man. Drinks on me next time." I stared at it for a long time, like I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. He hadn't just used me. He was trying to stick me with the bill. I typed and deleted 3 different responses. My hands were shaking, not with rage exactly, but with something worse, that cold, sinking realization that this wasn't just Mason being careless or self-absorbed. This was deliberate. Planned. He thought I'd just take it, like always. But something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It was quiet, internal. The kind of snap you don't hear until everything's already shifted. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't confront him. I just started making calls. First to the vineyard owner, who confirmed everything. "Yeah, Mason said you were handling the finances." Seemed like a family favor kind of thing. Then to the caterer. "He said you two were business partners. We even gave him the referral discount because of you." It all added up. So I made one more call to the caterer and told him to bring the final invoice to the event in person. Make sure payment was handled on site. He agreed. No problem, he said. We'll bring the paperwork directly to you. And that's how I ended up back at the vineyard on a sunny Saturday afternoon in my cheap charcoal suit, playing the part of quiet, harmless cousin one last time. I mingled. I smiled. I took every passive insult with the same calm expression I'd practiced for years. And when Mason made that comment, loud and snide, surrounded by people who didn't know me, or worse, pretended not to, I didn't bite. I didn't flinch. I just waited. And when the caterer pulled me aside an hour later, I played my part beautifully. I pointed at Mason, smiled, and stepped back into the crowd, watching his face when he saw the invoice. That was just the start. But this wasn't just about the party. That's what you need to understand. This wasn't about $7,200, or a jab about my suit, or even the fake smiles at family dinners. This was about something deeper, something that had been brewing since we were teenagers, since the day I turned 18 and my grandfather, the patriarch of the Miller family, called me into his study for a meeting I've never spoken about. Not to Mason. Not to my mom. Not to anyone. That meeting changed everything. And now, years later, with Mason oblivious and everyone else still stuck in the same loop of favoritism and polite cruelty, I finally had all the pieces I needed. Because while Mason thought he'd outplayed me with a party, he had no idea what was coming next. There was a time when I thought being quiet meant being weak. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just in that subtle, suffocating way where silence feels like surrender. Like maybe if I just stayed out of the way, kept my head down, didn't argue, didn't push back, maybe they'd stop seeing me as a disappointment. Maybe they'd see the work I was doing. Maybe they'd let me in. But when you grow up in a family like mine, silence doesn't earn you respect. It gets mistaken for permission. That night, after Mason got hit with the $7,200 catering bill, I left without saying goodbye. No grand speech, no confrontation. I just walked to my car, a sensible gray sedan parked between two imported SUVs, and sat behind the wheel for a long time, watching my own hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. I was done. For weeks after the party, no one said a word. Not Mason, not Aunt Brenda, not even Uncle Arthur. They all just moved on like it hadn't happened, like I hadn't been humiliated in front of them, like Mason hadn't tried to saddle me with a four-figure bill, like they hadn't laughed. But that's what families like mine do. They rewrite the narrative so quickly it makes your head spin, deny, deflect, distract. And in the silence that followed, I started thinking back to that meeting with my grandfather, the one I'd buried for years. It was on my 18th birthday. I was wearing a dress shirt that didn't quite fit and trying not to sweat through the back. My mom had driven me out to the estate at my grandfather's request. She didn't know what it was about. Neither did I. His study smelled like leather and old books. He didn't smile when I walked in, just nodded at the chair across from his desk. "I'll be blunt," he said. "You're not like the others." I remember feeling my stomach drop. I thought he was about to cut me out of something, or worse, lecture me on how I'd never measure up. But instead, he continued. "Mason, he's got the name, the look, but not the head. You've got the head, Ethan. I've watched you. You listen. You pay attention. And most importantly, you don't speak just to hear yourself talk." I didn't know what to say. My grandfather wasn't exactly known for compliments. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small black binder, thick with documents. He pushed it across the desk to me. "I set up something for you," he said. "It's not in your name. Not yet. But one day, you'll know what to do with it." I opened the binder. Inside were deeds, contracts, ownership shares, names I didn't recognize at the time, but would later come to know. A small but diverse portfolio, a parking garage, a strip mall, 2 rental properties in the outskirts of the city, and 30% ownership of a holding company I'd never even heard of. "I need someone in this family with both feet on the ground," he said. Not just another Miller who thinks the world owes him a yacht. You don't need to tell anyone about this. In fact, don't. I nodded slowly, unsure what I was agreeing to, but I kept that binder. I memorized every page. I never told a soul. When he passed away 3 years later, the will was straightforward. Most of the assets went to his children. Mason got his vintage watches. Aunt Brenda got the summer house. I got nothing. At least, that's what everyone thought. But I still had the binder. And over the years, I quietly began building from it. While Mason threw money into startups and brand deals and yacht parties, I bought cheap foreclosures and converted them into duplexes. I made partnerships with property managers. I learned how to read market shifts, track neighborhood trends, and negotiate commercial leases. By the time I was 27, I doubled the value of the original portfolio. By 30, I was cash flowing 6 figures annually. Quietly. Under a different LLC. No one in the family even knew the name on the mailbox. But I never used that success to fight back. Not really. I kept showing up to family functions in my off-the-rack suits, letting them believe I was scraping by. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that I was being humble. Now, I wasn't so sure. After the retirement party incident, I found myself questioning everything. The bitterness wasn't just because of what Mason did. It was because I let him do it. Again. I kept giving them the benefit of the doubt, like some starving dog waiting for scraps of decency. But maybe the only way to be seen was to stop hiding. And that started, ironically, with another betrayal. 2 months later, I got a call from a realtor friend of mine. Hey, weird thing. I got an inquiry on that warehouse you're co-invested in. Thought you'd want to know someone's trying to buy it out from under you. I blinked. What do you mean? He sent over the info, and there it was. A holding company owned by Mason Miller had put in a bid. A lowball offer, but serious enough to trigger negotiations. They thought I was just another absentee investor. I stared at the file in disbelief. He was trying to buy one of my properties. Without knowing it was mine. Whether it was another scheme or just dumb luck, it didn't matter. That was the moment everything clicked. He still had no idea who I really was. And maybe no one did. So, I started reintroducing myself. I rebranded my real estate company with my actual name, Miller Development Group. I updated the LLCs. I posted my first press release in a decade, highlighting a multi-million-dollar redevelopment project I was leading downtown. I started accepting speaking invitations at real estate forums. I even hired a small PR team to polish the story. And slowly, the calls started coming in. Ethan? Hey, it's your cousin Chloe. I didn't know you were working on that Midtown project. Wait, are you the Ethan from that commercial real estate article? Even Aunt Brenda sent me a clipped little text, saw your name in the paper. Impressive work. Hope you're doing well. But not Mason. Mason stayed quiet. Until the next family gathering. It was my grandmother's 80th birthday. A big deal in the Miller clan. Full formal dinner, speeches, photos, the whole 9 yards. I hadn't planned on attending, but then I saw the seating chart and noticed something funny. Mason had given a speech slot to himself. Not Grandma, not Uncle Arthur, just himself. That decided it for me. I showed up 10 minutes before the event started. Same suit, same calm expression, but something was different this time. When Mason saw me walk in, his smirk faltered for a split second, just enough to notice. Then he put it back on like a mask. Well, look who actually RSVP'd, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Didn't expect you to show your face after that little mix-up with the catering. All good, though. No hard feelings. He said it loud enough for people to hear. Always playing the room. But this time, I smiled differently. No hard feelings, I said. In fact, I should be thanking you. That night pushed me to reevaluate a few things. He blinked. Oh, yeah? I nodded. Yeah. Like how important it is to actually know who you're doing business with. He tilted his head, confused. But before he could ask more, someone called him away for a toast. And I just stood there, sipping my drink, waiting, watching. Because what he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that I just submitted an acquisition offer on one of his last remaining companies. Not through my name, not directly, but through one of my subsidiaries. And I had a plan. A quiet, methodical plan. Because when you've been underestimated your whole life, revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be earned. And trust me, I've been earning this one for years. If there's one thing I learned from watching Mason over the years, it's that when someone builds their entire identity on appearances, the best way to take them down is to let them talk. They always reveal too much. Always reach too far. Always leave the blinds open just a crack. And now that I had something to lose, not just assets, but presence, visibility, a growing name in the real estate world, I started noticing just how sloppily Mason moved through the industry. He pretended to understand. His companies changed names every year. He swapped investors like cufflinks. He made big promises with no structure underneath, like a house built on sugar cubes. It would all collapse the second it got wet. I just needed to turn on the rain. But I didn't want chaos. I wanted elegance. Strategy. I didn't want to blow up his life in a week. I wanted to set the dominoes so that by the time the last one fell, he'd be sitting in the wreckage wondering how he hadn't seen it coming, wondering how I'd done it while smiling across the dinner table. Because Mason had humiliated me publicly, at family events, at business functions, online, for years. But I had something now that he didn't. Time, influence, and a memory like a filing cabinet. It started with that company. He tried to buy one of my warehouses through Indigo Vision Concepts LLC. Sounded like something out of a failed pitch deck. I had my attorney run a deeper dive. Turns out, it was tied to a shell corporation in Delaware, which was tied to a business fund partially owned by Mason's former college roommate, a guy I remembered from one of Mason's Instagram beach trips. The kind of guy who never wore socks and always called people boss. I reached out to him under a pseudonym, told him I represented a buyer interested in acquiring Indigo Vision Concepts. He said Mason wasn't looking to sell, but hinted that the company was cash thin and pivoting. I pushed gently, expressed interest in purchasing some of their debt instead. Suddenly, he was a lot more willing to talk. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Mason was over-leveraged. He poured money into a chain of event venues that were bleeding rent and was behind on several vendor contracts. His legacy event empire was a smokescreen, and I was now in a position to control the airflow. But even then, I didn't move too fast. I took my time. Over the next 3 months, I did something I'd never done before. I started letting people see me. Not the quiet, polite Ethan who showed up to family events and dodged eye contact. Not the kid in the cheap suit trying to shrink himself to avoid a comment. No, I was done hiding. I started showing up to industry panels with my nameplate front and center. I gave a TEDx-style talk on urban redevelopment at a real estate conference in Chicago, posted clips of it on LinkedIn, which led to 2 podcasts and a local news segment. I started putting my photo next to my name on our company's site. Small thing, but it mattered. And I made sure every press release, every announcement, every article included the full name Ethan Miller, CEO of Miller Development Group. Because when Mason finally figured it out, I didn't want there to be any doubt. In the meantime, I made friends. Not in the schmoozy, fake laugh kind of way. I'd spent years building real relationships with vendors, contractors, city officials, the people Mason treated like props, the people he underpaid, overbooked, or ghosted. I started asking questions. Hey, did Mason ever clear that payment from last year? Did you ever get that equipment deposit back? Has he been renewing your contract or stringing you along? And the stories came flooding in. One DJ told me Mason had bounced a $2,000 check after a wedding and then blamed his assistant. A florist said she once drove 2 hours to set up an event only to find the venue locked and unpaid for. A lighting technician told me he'd had to threaten legal action just to get reimbursed for rental damage Mason's team caused. There was a pattern. And now, there were names. I compiled everything. Dates, invoices, photos, screenshots, vendor contracts. Not to sue. Not yet. I wanted leverage. Because Mason didn't just build his name on the illusion of wealth. He built it on being untouchable, charming, the guy who knew everyone. If that illusion cracked, even a little, it wouldn't be long before his house of cards blew over. But I still needed the right moment. And then the moment came, like a gift wrapped in arrogance. Mason announced on Instagram, of course, that he was opening a new luxury event venue in the heart of the city. Big launch party, black tie. The post showed a mock-up of a gorgeous glass structure surrounded by fairy lights and rooftop views. I stared at it for a long time, not because it was impressive, but because I recognized the building. It was one of mine, specifically one of the properties I'd acquired 6 months earlier through an investment group. We were still finalizing interior renovations. The building hadn't even cleared final inspections yet. No permits had been issued for events. No contracts had been signed. It wasn't even zoned for public gatherings. And yet, here he was, announcing a grand opening in 3 weeks. He was bluffing hard. I smiled. This was it. The perfect stage. I picked up the phone and called my property manager. We need to review the lease agreements on 712 East Lexington, I said. I think we've got a squatter. But I didn't shut him down. Not yet. Instead, I had my team send a formal request for documentation, permits, licenses, insurance. We CC'd his generic business email and his LLC's legal contact. We didn't accuse. We didn't threaten. We just asked politely. And predictably, Mason replied through his assistant, or rather, someone pretending to be his assistant. The grammar was awful, and it was clearly him behind the screen. Everything is in process. Just a minor delay with city paperwork. No need to stress. We're all good to go. We waited. And while we waited, I started making calls again, but this time to the guests. Mason had posted a partial list of confirmed RSVPs on his Instagram story, names of influencers, former clients, a local city councilwoman, and even a few family members. I reached out to every one of them, introduced myself as the actual owner of the venue. Explained calmly that the property wasn't cleared for use, that the event was not sanctioned, that anyone who showed up could potentially be liable if something went wrong. Most of them backed out immediately. One influencer even made a vague tweet about shady event organizers playing fast and loose with permits. Mason didn't know it yet, but the pillars were starting to shake. Then, a week before the grand opening, I scheduled a walkthrough with city inspectors on the same day Mason's team was supposed to do their tech rehearsal. It wasn't illegal. It was just inconvenient. And when the inspectors found unpermitted lighting rigs, exposed cables, and no emergency exit plan, they issued a temporary cease and desist. Nothing permanent, just enough to cancel the event. And finally, Mason called me. No assistant, no fake email, just him. I let it go to voicemail twice. On the third try, I picked up. "Ethan," he said, his voice brittle. "Hey, man. Listen, I think there's been some kind of mix-up with your team. I didn't realize there was an ownership overlap on the Lexington property. No big deal though. We can sort it out. I said nothing. He kept going. Look, I know we've had our bumps, but I've always respected your hustle. Seriously, you're a quiet killer, man. Super inspiring. And I'm actually thinking maybe we partner on this. Bring you in, make it official. You can get a cut of the venue profits and Mason, I said calmly. I already own it. Silence. Then what? I own the building. I own the permits. I own the name. The lease you forged? No. The invoices you sent to vendors? Fraudulent. The grand opening? Cancelled. He started to speak, but I wasn't done. I've got 3 years' worth of complaints from vendors you stiffed, contracts you broke, and clients you lied to. I've got invoices, recordings, emails. I even know about the silent investor you never paid back. The one who's thinking about going to the press. Ethan, he said, voice sharp now. What do you want? I smiled. Nothing yet. Then I hung up. Because the best part of setting the stage is knowing exactly when to walk off it. But the final act? That was still coming, and Mason had no idea what was waiting in the wings. I didn't hear from Mason for weeks after I hung up on him. No calls, no emails, not even a half-hearted attempt to guilt-trip me through our grandmother. The silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. I could feel it. He was scrambling behind the scenes, trying to hold things together, probably calling in favors, sending apology baskets, maybe even trying to rebrand again. That was always his move when the walls started closing in, disappear, repaint the same house, and hope no one noticed the cracks in the foundation. But this time, I had the blueprint. And I wasn't interested in letting him rebuild. Because this wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It wasn't about the cheap suit comments or the snide remarks at family parties. This was about years of Mason stepping on people like me, the quiet ones, the careful ones, while smiling for the camera. This was about watching my mother cry after a dinner where Aunt Brenda accidentally left her name off the seating chart. About missing my grandfather's funeral because Mason forgot to update the group chat with the right time. This was about justice, but I wasn't going to take it by force. I was going to let him hand it to me. And he did. About a month after our call, I got an email from one of the vendors I'd interviewed during my quiet investigation. He was a lighting technician. Quiet guy, no nonsense, ran a small crew of freelancers. He told me Mason had stiffed him on a $9,000 contract for a wedding back in March. Said he was waiting on payment from the client. The guy wrote, eventually just stopped answering. I asked for documentation. He sent me the invoice, email chain, and text screenshots. Clear as day. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, funny thing is, he used the Miller family name in the pitch deck. Said his cousin owned half the city. Is that true? I smiled. It was about to be. I forwarded the invoice to my attorney and had him draft a formal letter of intent to file a lien against Mason's event company, Elevate Venues Incorporated, on the grounds of unpaid subcontractor work. The company's assets were minimal, but they had one thing of value, the trademark and brand registration. We filed the lien. 3 days later, Mason called. He didn't sound angry this time. He sounded tired. Ethan, can we talk? He said. Like, actually talk. I met him at a quiet coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral ground. He showed up in dark sunglasses and a blazer that looked like it hadn't been steamed in weeks. He slid into the seat across from me and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I'm bleeding, man. I sipped my coffee. He looked around like someone might be recording him. I messed up. Okay? You were right about everything. The permits, the vendors, the accounts. I'm tapped out. I had to sell the beach condo just to cover July. I raised an eyebrow. The one in Malibu? He nodded, staring down at his coffee. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you've got leverage, he said, and because I think we can fix this together. I almost laughed. Even now, he thought we were on the same level. You want me to help you clean this up? He nodded. We partner officially. Merge Elevate into your group. I'll be the face. You handle the business. Miller Events. Legacy brand. Full family alignment. It'll work. You're the only one I trust. The only one he trusted. That was rich. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, let me think about it. And I did, for exactly 72 hours. Then I made the final move. I sent his assistant, or whoever was checking his inbox, a contract. A clean, simple buyout agreement. $1. Mason would retain zero ownership, zero decision-making power, and would be barred from starting any event or venue-based company in the state for the next 5 years. We'd assume his debts, but in return, we'd own the Elevate brand, the client list, the website, and all digital assets. I expected him to fight it. Rage. Threaten. Instead, the signed agreement came back within 48 hours. The moment I opened the file and saw his e-signature, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't triumph. Not exactly. It was relief. It was done. The dominoes had all fallen. Over the next 3 weeks, we dismantled Elevate from the inside. My team combed through every client contract, vendor deal, and unpaid invoice. We cleaned up what was salvageable and absorbed the rest. I reached out personally to every vendor Mason had burned, repaid what we could, negotiated terms for the rest. Word spread quickly, and the funny thing was, when people realized Mason was no longer involved, they came back. One of the city's most sought-after wedding planners booked 3 events with us. A corporate client who'd blacklisted Elevate after a scheduling disaster in 2023 sent us a 6-figure proposal. Our reputation, mine, soared. But Mason? He vanished. Rumors trickled through the family grapevine that he'd moved in with a girlfriend, that he was consulting on a startup, that he was taking time to reflect. No one asked me what happened. No one mentioned the buyout, not even Aunt Brenda. But the next time we were all in the same room? Thanksgiving dinner, Miller Estate, long table under chandeliers. Mason was quiet. He sat 2 seats away from me. Didn't make a single snide remark. Didn't crack a single joke about suits or salaries. At one point, he tried to make eye contact. I didn't return it. And when Uncle Arthur stood up to give his usual rambling toast, thanking everyone for being part of this great family legacy, he added something new, and a special shout-out to Ethan for taking the Miller name into the city and making it shine. Your grandfather would be proud. The table clapped. Even Mason. Later, as I stepped outside for air, my mother came up beside me. She smiled, wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and looked at me. You've come a long way, Ethan. I nodded. Took the long road. She touched my arm gently. You took the right one. And as the cold air bit at our faces and the lights from the estate glowed warm behind us, I realized something. This wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation. Of my name, my work, my place. Of everything they tried to take from me, dignity, pride, identity, and everything I'd quietly built back, one brick at a time. I looked at the stars, then back at the house, and I smiled because they'd never laugh at my suit again. Call to action, this whole journey made me rethink what family truly means, and what it takes to stand up for yourself. I'm curious, if you've ever faced this kind of quiet sabotage or outright disrespect from family, how did you handle it? Did you walk away, or did you find your own way to reclaim your narrative? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested to hear your stories.